Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. How you guys all doing? In today's video we are going to be learning how to sew a bubble skirt, otherwise known as a balloon skirt. This is the part 2 of my previous video where I showed how to draft and cut an asymmetric top. Today we are going to be focusing on the skirt. So the length of the skirt is dependent on what you want. This is the length I prefer. So right here is a fabric that I use for this skirt. This is a very lightweight crepe fabric and you'll be needing 1.5 yards of it. You will also be needing 1 yard of lining. As you can see here, I'm using a different color of lining because I want to be able to explain this video very well so that there will be no form of confusion whatsoever. So at this point now, I'll just place my hand at the tip of the fabric, that is the lining, and I'll fold it like this. So when you place your finger at that point and you fold it, it's going to form a triangle that you can see right here. So it's from this point that I'll be marking my waistline measurements and also the length of the skirt. So at this point I'm about to draft a quarter circle. So in order to do that, I'm going to be dividing my waist measurement. Take note that we are using our skirt measurements and not our natural waist measurements. My natural waist measurement is 25, but my skirt waist measurement is 27. So I'm going to divide 27 by 1.5. So I got 16.5 inches. I'll just go ahead and mark it at this point. I later remembered that I need extra 2 inches for zip because we'll be adding zip at the back of the skirt. So I went ahead to extend it to 1 inch below this 16 inch. So instead of 16, I'm marking 17 inch. And at this point, I'm just cross-checking to make sure I get the 29 inches. That is 27 plus 2 inches extra, 29 inches for the waist. So after that, the next thing I'm going to be doing is to mark the length of the lining. So the length of the lining is going to be different from that of the main fabric. So for the lining, I'm using 20 inches. While for the main fabric, I'll be using 27. So at this point, I am marking 20 inches from that waist measurement, that is the waistline, down. So you can also mark from the tip of the lining, that is at that point. But when you're marking from this point, you're going to add 17 inches to the measurement so that by the time you cut out that waist point, you still get your 20 inches afterwards. So I'll go ahead and mark my 20 inches or 37 inches depending on where you are marking it from, and I'll draw it and I'll connect the curve like this. So as you can see, the curve is well formed. So now I'll just connect it and smoothing it out, and at this point I'll go ahead and cut the waist measurement, and then after the waist measurement I'll be cutting the length of the lining. So with this, we are done with the lining, and take note that at this point I make sure that I notch the midpoints of the waist measurements and also the quarter point. So just pay attention to where I notch the midpoints, and then I'll also fold it again into 4 pieces like this, and I'll notch that point. I'll also notch the down part as well, and I'll notch the midpoints of the down side as well. The essence of this notching is by the time we are joining it to the fabric, we want to know exactly where to place the fabric on so that the gathers will be even. This is the main fabric that I'm using black, and right here I've placed it on fold into 4 pieces like this, and when you measure the width of it is about 26 inches. So that means by the time you open it up, you should have about 100 and something inches, 108 inches to be precise. While the length of the fabric, that is the length of the skirt, like I said earlier, I'm using 27 inches for this part. So at this point, I'm just opening it up, and this is what it looks like. I will go ahead and measure it again so that you see how long the fabric is. So to know how long your fabric is supposed to be, just times your waist measurement by 3 or 4 inches. So my waist measurement is 27. I times it by 3.5 thereabouts, and what I'm using now is about 108 inches for the length of this fabric. So right now I'll place it back into 4 folds like this, and I'll make sure I notch the midpoint and the quarter point. So just the way you notch the lining, notch the fabric as well. That is the main fabric, so that by the time you gather it and you are joining it to the lining, you will know exactly where to place it. So at this point now, I'm just measuring the width of the full circle. That's the biggest part of the circle for the lining. I'm measuring it from one point to the next, and what I got is about 59 inches. So that 59 inches, I will make sure when I gather it, I get back that 59 inches. So for the gathering, instead of using my sewing machine to gather, I'm using my hand needle for it, because this is way easier and less time consuming. So all you need to do is to take your needle and thread, and make sure that the length of the thread is exactly the 59 inches that we measured earlier. Remember, we measured the length of that, the width of the full circle, and we got 59. So make sure the length of your thread is 59 inches. So at this point now, I'll just go ahead and start gathering it. Pay attention to how I'm gathering it. I'm passing the needle through the fabric, in and out, and I'll continue doing this, making sure that I'm passing it through a straight line. That is half an inch, and it's on a straight line. So I'll continue doing this. I'll pass it inside and I'll bring it out, in, out, like that. Continue doing this, making sure that the stitches is equal and it is on the straight line. So by the time you're done, this is what it looks like. So as you can see, the thread on the needle is, I've exhausted it by gathering it through the fabric, and this is what it should look like. Okay, so now I'm just going to be placing it on the lining. So I'll be placing it at the length of the lining, that is the down part of the lining. So in order to do this, I'll be facing right side together, and I would arrange it. Make sure you leave 1 inch for zipper allowance. So from the edge of the fabric, leave 1 inch away from it, and then your gathering should start from about 1 inch away. Okay, so make sure that the gathering is even on all sides, and that is the reason why we notched the quarter points and the midpoint. So the quarter points of the main fabric, make sure you align it to the quarter points of the lining, and then you do the same thing for the midpoint as well. Make sure the midpoint of the fabric aligns with that of the lining, and when you are sewing it, you use half an inch sewing allowance, and you are making sure that you gather it equally on all sides. So you sew from one edge to the other side. By the time I was done, this is what it looks like. So I make sure that the gathering is equal on all sides, and I use half an inch sewing allowance. So by the time you're done, I'll just cut off the needle, that is that thread there, and I'll remove the needle from the fabric. So now I'm going to be turning it to the right side, and this is what it looks like. So at this point now, the next thing to do now is to gather the waistline of the fabric, so that it will be able to align to that of the lining. Okay, so in order to do this, I'll do the same thing that I did for the down part. I'll do the same thing for the up. The only difference now is that the up side, I'll be using my waist measurements. So I'll go ahead and measure the length of my fabric, that is the circumference of my lining. I'll just measure from one edge point to the next. It should be your waist measurement plus 2 inch extra for zipper allowance. So what I have here is 29 inches. So now I have gone ahead to thread my needle, and the length of the thread is exactly 29 inches that I measured earlier, which is my waist measurement plus 2 inch for sewing allowance. So after that, you just tighten that edge point like this, that is the end point, and now you start gathering just the way you did for the down part. You do the same thing for the up. So you put your needle through the fabric and you bring it out. You put it through and then you bring it out. You continue with the process until you reach the other end of the fabric. So make sure the line is straight. You are using 1/2 inch sewing allowance and the stitches are equal. So when you're done, this is what it looks like at this point. And as you can see, we have exhausted the thread. So now I'll just be joining the main fabric to the lining. So remember, we notched the quarter point and the midpoint. So make sure when you are sewing, the lining is the notch point of the main fabric is aligning to that of the lining. So just look for where the quarter point is and place it together with that of the lining, and then you look for the midpoint and place it together. And when you are sewing, make sure you arrange the gathers. Take your time, sew it as slowly as possible, and make sure everywhere is equal when you are gathering. This is the only way you can have a perfect result and your work will look more professional by the time you're done. So at this time, this is what it looks like. I was done joining the fabric to that of the lining, and now I'll be going ahead to cut out the band. So for the band, this is what we have. I've cut my fabric, I added interfacing to it, and the length of it is my waist measurement plus 2 inches extra for zip, that is 29 inches. And I've placed it on fold, and the length of it is 2.5 inches on fold. That means by the time you open it up, it should be 5 inches. So at this point, I'll just join the band to the skirt. So I'll be joining it from the lining point. So I'll be joining the lining of the band to that of the fabric and to that of the skirt. Okay, so just place it together. Make sure you are sewing using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and you sew from one point, that is one zipper point, all the way to the next. So by the time you're done, this is what it looks like. So I've turned it to the right side, and this is what we have. So at this point, just go ahead and fold in 1/2 inch inside, and you use your pin and pin it down. You continue folding it 1/2 inch inward and pin it down. So you pin from one zipper point all the way to the next, and this is what it should look like by the time you're done. So at this point, you're going to take it to the sewing machine and you're going to top stitch it. Make sure you top stitch it very clean so that the work will look neat. So after you're done top stitching it, the next thing to do now is to add the zip. So before adding the zip, make sure you join the lining to the fabric at that zip point like this. So you can sew using 1/2 inch sewing allowance, and then after sewing, you can just go ahead and join the zip. So just the way you sew your invincible zip to a skirt, it's the same thing you are going to be doing. So at this time, I was done sewing it and I closed the down part of it, and this is what it looks like. So this is basically all for today's tutorial. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and leave a comment, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.